everyone, welcome to our final video about cell respiration. In this video, I want to summarize the process of cellular respiration and then talk to you about what happens if there is no oxygen. So, just to recap, the reactants or the things that are used in cell respiration are glucose, which we eat, and oxygen, which we breathe in. And those materials go from our stomachs or our lungs to our cells all throughout our body. Then the products are carbon dioxide, which is a gas we breathe out, water, which you can get rid of in many different ways, and ATP. And the ATP is the whole point of this, to make ATP, which is usable energy for our cells. And this process is called aerobic because it does use oxygen. So you'll remember there are 3 steps in cellular respiration. The first step is glycolysis, and it takes place in the cytoplasm. So we haven't even made it into the mitochondria yet. This is in the cytoplasm of your cells, that gel-like substance of your cells. Glycolysis happens where glucose is broken into pyruvate and a little bit of energy. You can see that there. So glycolysis happens to break down glucose in a way into this stuff called pyruvate that can then fit into the mitochondria. That pyruvate that was made in glycolysis moves into the Krebs cycle, which is also known as the citric acid cycle, but it occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria, the gel-like substance of the mitochondria. And basically what happens is oxygen gets a little bit of oxygen gets used, and pyruvate gets transformed through a series of reactions into a couple of energy molecules that were NADPH and FADH2, so chemical energy, and some carbon dioxide, which you're going to breathe out, comes from the Krebs cycle. Now, the whole point of the Krebs cycle was to make this chemical energy, which goes to the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain uses the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And remember, that's great. The inner membrane has those cristae, those folds, and it has a lot of surface area. And so on the inner membrane, we have this thing called the electron transport chain, which uses up a lot of oxygen, and it produces some water, but the main thing it produces is 36 ATP energy, lots of energy. And that is the whole purpose of cellular respiration, to make ATP energy. Now, you might notice here, some chemical energy went into the electron transport chain and some oxygen went into the electron transport chain. And from that, you could make a little water, but you made a lot of ATP. So what happens if you dive deep in the ocean and you don't have oxygen for a while? Like you're diving really deep and you only have 1 breath of air. You don't have a lot of oxygen, and so something else would happen other than the electron transport chain, which is called fermentation. You can have lactic acid fermentation, which builds up lactic acid in your muscles and makes you really sore after you've worked out. Or you could have alcohol fermentation, which occurs in other types of organisms other than animals, but things like fungus, like yeast, produces alcohol. So let's talk a little bit more about the summary, and then we'll talk more about fermentation. So here's just another picture that summarizes. I'm going to show you several of these to help you really understand this process. So glucose and oxygen go in to cellular respiration. Carbon dioxide, water, and ATP come out. And the first step is glycolysis, where you break glucose, which you ate, into a little bit of energy, but into mainly these things called pyruvate, which combined with oxygen go through many different steps of the Krebs cycle to produce, again, a little bit of energy and some carbon dioxide, which you're going to breathe out. And they produce chemical energy that is then going to be used in the electron transport chain, combined with oxygen, and produces a lot of ATP energy. And ATP energy is the whole point of this, to get that usable energy for your cells. And then also some water gets produced. Here's another summary picture. This is like the one that you just saw on the previous slide. Glycolysis occurs. Glucose is broken into pyruvate or pyruvic acid, which can then move into the mitochondria. Because remember, glycolysis took place in the cell, in the cytoplasm, actually, part of the cell. And then the pyruvate or pyruvic acid, moves into the mitochondria in the matrix, goes through the Krebs cycle, produces some carbon dioxide, which you can breathe out, but mainly produces some chemical energy in the form of NADPH and FADH2, which are just energy molecules. And then in the inner membrane, this curvy inner membrane with lots of surface area, the electron transport chain takes place, and that requires oxygen, and it produces some water, but mainly it produces a ton of ATP, lots of usable energy for our bodies. Last summary picture. Okay, just to put it all together, look, you have glucose that you ate, and it went into your stomach, and then that went into your bloodstream, and it went to your cells. And that glucose goes through a process called glycolysis, which is the first step of cellular respiration, where it gets broken down into these things called pyruvate. And pyruvate then is able to move into the matrix of the mitochondria, where the Krebs cycle takes place. It uses a little bit of oxygen, and the Krebs cycle takes place. It produces some energy molecules, NADH2 and NADH and FADH2. That was kind of the point of the Krebs cycle, produce these little energy molecules. It also produces some carbon dioxide, which you'll breathe out. But anyway, these energy molecules move to the inner membrane of the mitochondria, where the electron transport chain takes place. And that moves hydrogen across the inner membrane to build up a concentration gradient. And then those hydrogen molecules move from an area of high concentration to low concentration through the ATP synthase, and it produces a lot of ATP, which is usable energy for our cells. So lots of ATP produced during the electron transport chain. That is the whole point of this process of cellular respiration. We want to produce a lot of ATP. All right, last little thing for you to think about. What if there's no oxygen? You saw that oxygen is needed in a big way for the electron transport chain. So what if there is no oxygen? What if you're working out so hard that you can't breathe in enough oxygen fast enough for your body to use it? Well, without oxygen, we can't have the Krebs cycle, and we can't have the electron transport chain. Basically, our mitochondria don't work how we want them to. So instead, we'll go through this thing called fermentation. So glycolysis can still occur. The glucose gets broken down into pyruvate or pyruvic acid, but we can't do the Krebs cycle. We can't do the electron transport chain. So if there's no oxygen, we would have fermentation. That in our bodies, we would do lactic acid fermentation. It happens in your muscles, and it makes you really sore after you've worked out. So that lactic acid can build up and feel like glass in your muscles. It really hurts. But our bodies do that. And then yeast, which is kind of a fungus, will actually do alcohol fermentation. It can be used to make various foods and drinks, including bread. Thanks so much for listening.